Have you ever looked at someone making a huge difference in the world and just wondered, how do they actually do that?
Yeah, or maybe even thought, how could I do more? How can I make a bigger impact?
Exactly. And it turns out the gap between just sort of helping out in a typical way and finding the most effective way to help, it's not just a little gap. It's absolutely enormous.
It really is. And wrapping your head around that difference, it fundamentally changes how you might approach things. Your time, your money, your whole ability to make a positive mark.
Absolutely. And that kind of staggering potential for doing good is one of the core ideas we're getting into today.
Yep. We're taking a deep dive into the whole world of altruism, effective giving, and those really big questions about how we can actually do the most good we possibly can.
We've pulled together quite a range of sources for this. We're looking at research on effective altruism, high-impact careers.
And then there are the philosophical arguments, about moral obligation, plus studies digging into the psychology, the evolution, even the sort of theological side of why people help in the first place.
Right. So our mission for you, the listener, is to sort of navigate all these different viewpoints, pull out what the sources are really highlighting.
And help you think through what it all means for making a difference in today's world.
We're essentially tackling 4 big questions. First, just how big is this potential for impact we're talking about?
Second, what do these ideas actually say about our duty to help? Is it an obligation?
Third, what really drives people? The psychology behind generosity.
And finally, the practical side. How do we actually apply all this stuff? Okay, let's get into it, starting with that potential, that mind-blowing potential.
So the first thing that really jumps out from the sources is just the sheer scale of impact that seems possible.
And crucially, how much that scale changes depending on how you decide to help. It's not all equal.
Yeah, this really grabbed me too. The idea that the difference between, say, the best way to tackle a problem and just a typical way, it's not marginal. We're talking orders of magnitude better.
Exactly. And you see this emphasized in research from places like 80,000 Hours. They're a nonprofit looking at evidence-based career guidance for impact.
Right.
And they argue that the impact you have, say, through your career really depends on 3 main things.
Okay, what are they?
First, how pressing are the problems you're working on? Some problems are just vastly bigger or more neglected than others.
Makes sense.
Second, the scale of contribution your chosen path allows. Can you actually move the needle significantly in that role or field? And third, your personal fit. Are you actually good at it? Will you stick with it?
Right, the practical side. And their claim, based on the research they cite, is that within each of those factors, the problem's importance, the scale, your fit, the best options can be like 10 times better or even more.
Yeah, easily 10 times, sometimes much more than just a typical option. And because your overall impact is like a multiplication of these factors,
Oh, wow.
the total variation gets absolutely huge.
So the difference between a good choice and a great choice isn't just a bit better, it's potentially hundreds of times better.
Potentially, yes. It's a pattern sometimes called a fat tail distribution. Think about something like height. Most people cluster around the average. The tallest person isn't thousands of times taller.
Right, maybe twice as tall at the extreme.
But then look at things like income or maybe wealth or even the impact of scientific discoveries or hit songs. The very top performers can be thousands of times higher than the average. It's a completely different shape of distribution.
So you're saying doing good might follow that fat tail pattern.
Yeah.
Like the 80-20 rule on steroids, a small number of actions or approaches account for a massive chunk of the positive outcomes.
That seems to be the implication highlighted in the sources, yeah. Like maybe black swan events, but for a positive impact.
And the implication for an individual, what does that mean?
Well, the sources suggest something pretty profound. That one person, by making strategic choices about where they put their effort or resources, seems to have the potential to, say, save the lives of dozens of other people.
Dozens, wow.
Or even play a real part in reducing some major global catastrophic risk. It's a big claim.
That is, yeah, that's staggering. And it's not just theory, right? You see this in the work of organizations like GiveWell.
Exactly. They're charity evaluators who really dig into the data. They try to figure out which specific programs save or improve lives the most, per dollar spent.
And what do they find?
Their findings really illustrate this variation dramatically. They highlight programs like vitamin A supplementation for kids in certain areas costs about $2 per child per year.
Okay.
And their estimate is it saves a life for roughly $3,500.
$3,500 per life saved.
Roughly, yeah. Or think about distributing insecticide-treated bed nets to prevent malaria. Their model suggests that saves a life for around $5,000.
Okay, compare that to, I don't know, the cost of some other interventions, or maybe just donating to a charity where you don't know the cost effectiveness. The distance must be huge.
It really is stark. You could be talking thousands of dollars per life saved versus, well, potentially tens or hundreds of thousands, or maybe the impact isn't even measurable in lives saved for less effective programs.
And that's why this potential matters so much to you, the listener. Understanding this difference means that thinking strategically about where your time and money go.
It isn't just a nice to have. It can literally multiply your positive impact by factors that are hard to even imagine otherwise.
Okay, that potential is incredible, maybe even a little intimidating.
It can be, yeah.
Which brings us squarely to the next big question these sources dive into. If we can do that much good, what does that mean for our moral obligations?
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit uncomfortable.
Definitely. This is the core ethical challenge explored in the sources. Peter Singer, the philosopher, makes a really powerful case here.
Right. His main argument, boiled down, is basically if you can stop something really bad from happening,
Without sacrificing anything nearly as important.
then, morally speaking, you ought to do it. You have an obligation.
And he uses that famous thought experiment, right? The drowning child.
Exactly. You're walking past a shallow pond, you see a child drowning, you can easily wade in and save them, but
Yeah.
oh no, you'll ruin your expensive new shoes.
Right. And pretty much everyone agrees you have to save the child. The shoes don't matter.
Of course. So Singer asks, okay, why is our intuition so different when the child is far away, maybe dying from a preventable disease, and the sacrifice is just the money we might spend on, say, luxuries we don't really need?
It's a powerful question. What about the argument, well, not everyone else is helping? Does that let you off the hook?
Singer tackles that head on. He says, basically, no. While it's true everyone should help, the fact that others aren't doing their part doesn't reduce your obligation, if anything.
It makes your help even more critical.
Precisely. Your help is needed even more to prevent that suffering, because others are failing to act. Their inaction doesn't excuse yours.
So he's really challenging the traditional way we think about ethics, that maybe we focus too much on just not doing wrong ourselves.
Yeah, he argues our ethics haven't caught up with our globalized world where we can help people far away relatively easily. He thinks we should be focused more on doing more good.
And his conclusion is pretty demanding, isn't it? That we should prevent as much suffering as we can, up to the point where giving more would mean sacrificing something of comparable moral worth.
Yes, and he fully acknowledges that this standard goes way beyond how most people actually behave. It's a radical call.
Though it's interesting, the sources mention this idea isn't entirely brand new. Figures like Thomas Aquinas centuries ago.
Right, talking about how surplus wealth is essentially owed to the poor for their basic needs. So the idea of an obligation has historical roots.
But then you get a different perspective, or maybe a complication, from thinkers like Judith Lichtenberg.
Yes, she brings in a really important critique, or perhaps a nuance. She questions whether framing everything purely in terms of individual moral obligation is the right way to think about these huge systemic problems.
Like global poverty, or climate change, or issues around, say, sweatshops, which she calls new harms.
Exactly. Her point is, these aren't like the drowning child scenario where one person can fix it. These problems come from the combined actions, often unintended, of millions or billions of people. No single individual is solely responsible, and no single individual can solve it alone.
And trying to hold each person strictly accountable for not contributing at all or for fixing it, that feels overwhelming.
It can feel incredibly demanding, yeah. But it leads to what philosophers call the demandingness objection, which both Singer and Lichtenberg actually discuss.
Which is the idea that if a moral rule asks too much of people,
it might just backfire. People might shut down, feel guilty but do nothing, or just ignore it. Lichtenberg talks about an anemic response. If the standard seems impossibly high, maybe people won't even try.
So she suggests that maybe for these massive collective problems, thinking about strict individual obligation isn't the most helpful frame.
Right. She explores the idea that perhaps our responsibilities here are better understood as less strict, maybe more collective. The focus shifts towards each person aiming to do their fair share.
Their fair share, both in terms of positive duties, like giving aid, and also negative duties, like trying not to contribute to those new harms.
Exactly. It's about shared responsibility within these complex systems rather than an overwhelming individual burden.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a really tough puzzle, doesn't it? You have this huge potential impact on one side, these big ethical arguments about obligation.
And then the reality of these massive, complex, global problems. So, what is your fair share? How do you figure that out?
How do you balance that potential impact with what feels sustainable or what you feel genuinely obligated to do? It's not easy.
Definitely not. And moving beyond the what should we do, the sources also dig into the why, like why do people help at all? What's going on inside us?
Yeah, the motivations. This part draws on psychology, evolution, even faith and spirituality. It's a really rich area.
Psychologically, for instance, there's a lot of evidence for what's called empathy-induced altruism. Feeling empathy for someone can really motivate you to help, even if it costs you something.
Even if the other person hasn't been cooperative before.
Studies suggest, yes, empathy can override strict reciprocity sometimes. And generally, people who are more pro-social often seem driven by feelings of social responsibility or fairness.
And it's complicated, right? Like your personality matters, your mood, even how someone asks for help.
Absolutely. The sources mention studies showing that framing a request as, say, an economic transaction versus just asking for charity can sometimes counterintuitively make people more willing to give. It's complex.
And these kinds of helpful behaviors start pretty young, don't they?
Apparently so, yes. Hints of altruism seem to emerge quite early in childhood development.
Okay, what about the evolutionary angle? Helping others, especially at a cost to yourself, seems like it shouldn't survive natural selection.
That's the classic puzzle, isn't it? Why would costly helping evolve? Well, there are several theories. One is multi-level selection. Maybe groups with more cooperative, altruistic members just outcompeted other groups.
So cooperation helps the group survive, even if it costs individuals sometimes.
That's one idea. Another big one is inclusive fitness or kin selection. Helping your relatives who share your genes is indirectly helping your own genes propagate.
Right, saving your siblings makes evolutionary sense.
And research also shows people aren't purely selfish calculators, like the old Homo economicus model suggested. We care about fairness, we reciprocate kindness, even when it's costly in the short term. This suggests altruistic tendencies could be adaptations shaped by our evolutionary past, perhaps through needing to cooperate in groups.
And then you have the whole dimension of faith and spirituality.
Yeah, this is a powerful source of motivation for many. The concept of agape love in some traditions, that selfless, unconditional love, is often seen as like the sacred version of secular altruism.
And the sources give some incredible examples of people driven by these deep convictions.
Absolutely. Think of someone like Millard Fuller, who founded Habitat for Humanity. He saw it explicitly as putting his Christian faith into action. His belief was, if everyone's made in God's image, there must be enough resources, we just need to share them.
Or Patty Anglin, moved by her faith to foster infants with really complex medical needs.
And Christina Noble, Mama Tina, whose own difficult childhood in Ireland fueled this deep sense of destiny to help street children in Vietnam. It came from a place of profound compassion born from suffering.
You also see figures like Mahatma Gandhi, with his philosophy of non-possession, seeing extra stuff is almost a crime when others lack basics.
Or Vinoba Bhave in India, moved by love, who walked the country persuading landowners to donate millions of acres to the landless, guided by the principle of Sarvodaya, the uplift of all.
Martin Luther King Jr. framing the civil rights struggle in terms of love as powerful action, overcoming evil with good.
Albert Schweitzer in his Reverence for Life. The Dalai Lama talking about empathy as this inability to bear the sight of another's suffering and the need for universal kindness. It's powerful stuff.
What does the research say about, like, general religiosity and giving? Is there a clear link?
It's actually a bit mixed, according to the sources. Some studies don't find a strong connection between formal religious practice, like church attendance, and general helping behavior. But other studies do find links, especially when looking at giving specifically to help the poor. And it seems intrinsic religiosity, how central faith is to a person's actual identity and life, might be more predictive than just outward observance.
And maybe differences between denominations matter too.
That seems to be the case sometimes, yeah. The core idea is that religious norms and values can become deeply internalized and genuinely shape how people act.
And the sources also mention something about extreme altruism, like donating a kidney to a stranger.
Right, that people who do these extraordinary things often connect it strongly to their sense of identity, who they are, or the influence of their social group, which can certainly include religious communities.
It really makes you pause and think, doesn't it? What actually motivates your desire to help? Is it that gut feeling of empathy?
Or is it more a sense of duty, maybe flowing from those ethical arguments we talked about?
Your core values,
Yeah.
your faith tradition, maybe a mix of everything.
And how does your own sense of who you are, your identity, connect to how much you're willing to do for others, especially strangers?
It's a lot to take in. The scale of the problems, the potential impact, the ethical weight. It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed.
Definitely. You can feel like, wow, I'm not doing nearly enough, or get paralyzed by the pressure to find the absolute perfect way to help, to maximize everything.
Which can be counterproductive, right?
Totally. And the sources really acknowledge this. That's why this idea of imperfect, effective altruism comes up, pushed by groups like Giving What We Can.
What's the core message there?
It's basically saying, it is absolutely okay. In fact, it's probably necessary for the long haul to be an imperfect, effective altruist. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Because this is a long game. Sustainability matters.
Exactly. Trying to be perfectly optimal right away can just lead to burnout or feeling negative.
Right.
The sources suggest focusing on just aiming in a generally promising direction and learning as you go.
And they offer some practical tips for making it feel less daunting.
Yeah, simple, manageable things like maybe set up a small automatic monthly donation to one of those highly effective charities that GiveWell recommends. Just get started.
Takes the decision fatigue out of it each month.
Right. Or maybe dedicate, say, one afternoon a year specifically to researching where your giving could have more impact. Make it a focused task.
Find a giving buddy, someone to talk this stuff over with.
Yeah, that can help with motivation and accountability, or even just commit to reading like one article or blog post a week about effective giving so you're learning gradually instead of trying to absorb everything at once.
These practical steps seem to connect back to that philosophical point about demandingness, don't they?
They really do. If the absolute ideal feels completely overwhelming, the question becomes, what's a level of engagement that feels sustainable, meaningful, and manageable for you?
The goal isn't necessarily perfection right out of the gate.
No, it's more about consciously trying to steer your efforts and resources in a direction where you have good reason to believe they'll make a substantially bigger positive difference than they might otherwise.
It's about taking all these complex ideas, the amazing potential, the ethics, the motivations, and figuring out how to translate them into your own life.
In a way that works for you, that feels authentic, and that you can stick with. What are maybe one or two small steps you could realistically take, starting now, to move towards having a more positive impact?
So we've covered a lot of ground today, a
Yeah.
really significant landscape.
For sure. We looked at that incredible potential difference in effectiveness,
Yeah.
how some ways of helping are vastly more impactful than others.
We wrestled with those tough ethical questions. Obligation, demandingness, what's our fair share?
We explored the roots of altruism, why we help, looking at psychology, evolution, faith, and deep moral convictions.
And finally, we touch on the practical side, how to actually move forward with these ideas, embracing imperfection and finding a sustainable path.
Yeah, taken together, the sources really challenge us, don't they? To think more carefully, more strategically about how we navigate this complex world if our goal is to do the most good we can.
Recognizing the huge needs out there, but also recognizing the diverse motivations and capacities we all bring to the table.
Exactly.
All right, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on after this deep dive. If it's true, as these sources strongly suggest, that the difference between the best ways of helping and just the typical ways is truly enormous, what does that imply about our responsibility just to understand that difference? Not necessarily act perfectly, but just to make an effort to understand it.